Hello everyone, today I want to share my opinion about two language teaching approaches, Communicative Language Teaching or CLT and then Post-Method Pedagogy. The situation is that I have been assigned to teach beginner level elementary school students in a remote rural area of Indonesia. When I first looked at this scenario, I thought CLT would be the obvious answer. After all, CLT is one of the most popular approaches in English language teaching. Its main goal is to help students use English for communication rather than simply memorizing grammar rules. In theory, this sounds excellent because language is meant to be used and not just be studied. However, the more I thought about the actual classroom situation, the more I started to question whether CLT would really be the best choice. One problem is that CLT assumes students have enough language knowledge to communicate. But in this case, we are dealing with beginners who have very limited exposure to English. If students only know a few words, what exactly are they supposed to communicate with? Asking students to speak before they have enough vocabulary may create frustration instead of meaningful learning. Another issue is that CLT often works best with certain conditions which are available. Many communicative activities require time, materials, manageable class sizes, and sometimes even access to additional resources. In a remote rural school where resources are limited and classes may be relatively large, those conditions may not always exist. This does not mean CLT is a bad approach. I actually think its focus on communication is extremely important. The problem is not the theory itself, the problem is whether the theory matches the reality of the classroom. This is why I find post-method pedagogy more convincing for this particular situation. What I like about this method is that it starts with the context instead of starting with a method. Rather than asking teachers to follow a fixed set of procedures, it encourages them to examine their students' resources, culture, and learning environment before making decisions. For me, such this makes much more sense in a remote Indonesian village. Every classroom is different. Some schools may have textbooks, while others may have very few learning materials. Some students may learn quickly, while others need more support. Because of these differences, I do not believe one method can solve every teaching problems. At the same time, I do not think post-method pedagogy is perfect. One criticism is that I places a lot of responsibility on teachers. The teacher must decide what works and what does not. If a teacher lacks experience or training, that freedom can become difficult to manage. So I would not describe post-method pedagogy as an easy solution. Even so, I still think it is the better choice. The reason is simple. It allows teachers to adapt. In a remote area, adaptation is often more important than strict adherence to a teaching method. That said, I would not completely abandon CLT. In fact, I would borrow some of its ideas. For example, I would still encourage students to practice greetings, introduction, simple questions, and everyday expressions. These activities give students opportunities to use English in meaningful ways. So my position is not that CLT is wrong and post-method pedagogy is right. Rather, I believe CLT by itself might be too dependent on conditions that are not always available in remote rural schools. Post-method pedagogy is more suitable because it allows teachers to respond to the realities of the classroom while still incorporating useful techniques from CLT when appropriate. In conclusion, if I were if I were teaching beginner level elementary school students in a remote rural area of Indonesia, I would choose post-method pedagogy as my primary approach. I believe its flexibility, adaptability, and focus on local needs make it more practical and realistic. At the same time, I would continue using selected communicative activities from CLT to help students develop confidence and basic communication skills in English. I think that would be all from me. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.